I'm the Rick in Rick Turns. Today, I want to demonstrate my burnishing jig for putting a fine edge on a shear scraper. But before we get started with that, I'd like to answer a question from one of my subscribers. John of Utah writes, Nick, I'm a vegetarian. Is that going to be a problem in my wood turning? Well, Ron, first of all, I'm Rick, not Nick. You probably got me confused with Nicktunes, a YouTube channel where a guy dresses up like Santa Claus, old Saint Nick, and sings parodies of Christmas carols like Deck the Malls with Loads of Money. It came upon a midnight's beer. The restroom door said gentleman, my favorite. And here we come a wrestling. Interesting channel, and he's got a lot more subscribers than I do. But to get back to your original question, Don, no, that should not be a significant problem, at least not at the wood lathe. Anti-carnivorism is an occasional affliction in the wood turning community. It's nothing to be ashamed of, much. Just be sure to always use a food-safe finish on your work. And if you turn any wooden fruit, chew it very carefully before you swallow. Good luck, Jan, and thanks for writing. Now let's get to work. This little burnishing jig is just dead simple to make. But what is it for? Well, I thought you'd never ask. So, let's talk about scrapers. More specifically, using scrapers to cut rather than to scrape, shear scraping. I use scrapers for two things principally: wasting off a lot of wood, usually on the interior of a bowl, or producing a very fine surface on the exterior and interior of a bowl. Normal scraping to remove wood fast is done with the scraper flat on the tool rest, with the scraper edge perpendicular to the direction of the rotation of the work. This scrapes the wood surface rather than cutting it. Tearing of the wood fibers rather than cutting of the wood fibers occurs, particularly on cross grain. The results from this scraping cut that I just made have left some torn grain. It's not really too bad, all things considered, but it's still torn primarily on the end grain areas. Now let's take a look at a shear scrape on the same surface. As you can see, I'm holding the scraper at a vertical angle to the wood instead of laying it down flat on the tool rest. In this position, the edge cuts rather than scrapes, and I'm going to end up with a much better surface. I've made several more shearing cuts off camera. Now let's take a closer look at the surface, if the camera will let me. I have managed to cut away most of the torn grain left from the scraping cut. It's still a little rough, it could be better, but overall it's not too bad. Whether scraping or cutting with the scraper, the work is being done by the burr right on the edge of the tool. That burr can be rough or it can be smooth. A rough burr is produced by the grinder. A smooth burr is produced by burnishing. Burnishing is a process of forming an edge by honing a flat, even surface with a harder edge. Cabinet scrapers and woodworking have been sharpened this way for many years. Wood turning scrapers can also be burnished to produce a finer and more even burr that cuts cleaner than the burr produced direct off the grinder. The first step to producing the burr, and for many turners the only step, is to grind the tool on the grinder. This is a simple and very quick operation. I got my platform set for the angle of my scraper, and I just refreshed the edge, watching for the sparks to come over the top of the tool. I don't need to grind very much material off. All I really want to do is raise that little burr right on the edge. You can stop right here if you want to. The burr off of the grinder will produce a better surface with shear scraping than with plain scraping, so you're already ahead of the game. However, burnishing the edge will produce a finer edge and a finer cut, and is worth the effort. So, get a sharpening stone and remove the burr you just put on the tool. This sounds kind of counterproductive, but it's necessary to do this before burnishing. I'm using a diamond hone here, and I'm keeping it flat on the upper surface of the scraper blade. I just rub it back and forth across the edge of the tool. It doesn't take much to remove that burr. Clamp the scraper upright in a vise. For a burnishing tool, you can use a round metal bar like the shaft of a screwdriver. You can use a diamond hone, which is what I have here, or you can buy a dedicated burnisher from a wood-turning or woodworking store. To burnish, just draw the burnisher across the edge of the scraper at a slight angle, say 5 degrees, down towards the top of the scraper. 3 or 4 strokes will be sufficient to draw a burr on it. All of this video has been just to get us up to this point, my burnishing jig. The jig is a small piece of plywood with a stop fastened onto the end at about a 5-degree angle. I've glued a diamond honing stone to the stop. The jig is about 5 inches long and it's 4 inches wide. On the bottom of the jig is a cleat so that I can clamp the jig in a vise when I'm ready to use it. The stone that I glued onto the jig is only 3/4 of an inch wide. Wider would be better, but this is what I had on hand. As you can see here, the stone and the backstop are set at about a 5-degree forward angle. That's the burnishing angle. To use the jig, I first clamp it in my woodworking vise. Removing the grinder burr is done by placing the scraper on its side up against the diamond hone and moving it back and forth. Because the diamond hone is only 3/4 of an inch high, I have to flip the scraper over to do the other side. Burnishing is done by putting the scraper flat on the jig with the top of the scraper up and then drawing the edge across the diamond hone while rotating the scraper at the same time. Generally, it's only going to take 4 to 5 strokes to have a nice burr on the scraper's edge. The advantage of using the burnishing jig is that it ensures a consistent angle. Let's take one more look at the burnishing strokes from a slightly different angle. Scraper is flat on the jig with the top up. I rotate the scraper and move it across the diamond hone at the same time. Now, let's go back to the lathe and test the scraper on a bowl. For this test, I'm going to shear scrape the outside of the bowl, first with a dull scraper, and then with the tool fresh off the grinder, and finally with the scraper after burnishing the edge. This is the dull scraper, and I hope you don't ever let your scraper get this dull. Note, there's no shavings, not even any dust. I might have gotten this too dull. I'm applying more pressure now. I can still only barely get any cutting action at all. The surface that I just scraped really isn't changed much at all, not even any torn grain, because I had that scraper so dull. I've gone back to the grinder and I've reground a new edge on the scraper. Now this is definitely an improvement. I am getting effortless cutting, applying very little pressure at all, and I'm getting very fine shavings coming off the wood. I'm holding the tool at about 45 degrees and possibly even steeper than that, although it doesn't show too clearly in the video. This surface is very clean now. There's just a little bit of torn grain in some of the cross grain areas. But overall, this is a very good surface. It could be a little better though. Now, I've burnished the edge of the scraper. I'm using the same cutting technique as I did before. The scraper is held at about 45 degrees or so to the surface of the bowl. Notice that the tool is not cutting as aggressively as it was before, and in this case that's a good thing. I'm not trying to get fast stock removal. I want a smooth, clean surface with no grain tear. I'm getting slightly finer shavings than I did with the grinder edge. Let's take a look at the surface. It looks good. It's smooth. There's no grain tear out, even in the cross grain areas. I think this guy is ready to send. I believe that burnishing the edge of a scraper for shear scraping is well worth the minor effort that's involved. With my burnishing jig, it's easier for me to burnish the scraper than it's ever been before. You can also burnish the scraper with a steel rod, or you can use a carbide rod. I've built a jig with a carbide peg inserted in it at 5 degrees, and it does well, but I believe I get a better edge with the diamond hone. I got the idea of using a diamond hone for burnishing from this article by Jerry Wright and Alan Lacer, published in the American Woodturner. They tested the diamond stone honing versus plain honing with steel, and they found the diamond hone to be superior. If you're interested in burnishing your scraper, I urge you to take a look at their article at this URL. Doc Green also has a very good discussion of shear scraping on his website at this URL. Finally, there is one burnishing jig available commercially from Veritas. It uses a carbide peg for burnishing the edge. I've never used it, but I'm sure it works fine. In conclusion, I believe that a burnished edge produces a much finer, cleaner cut on wood than an edge that's fresh off of the grinder. And I haven't mentioned this before, but the burnished edge will last longer than a grinder edge. Like other things, burnishing is better with diamonds, so if you decide to go this route, get a diamond hone.